very happy to have in studio Jules Zalon. And Jules is a resident of the community, and he is a copyright attorney.
Yes.
And Jules, we're going to go way back for a moment. And you originally came from New Jersey?
Paterson, New Jersey, originally.
Originally.
Yeah, the Oranges.
Okay. And you went through school in that community? And
I went to Fairleigh Dickinson University and NYU Law School.
Okay. So, what would possess a person to want to become a lawyer? How did that happen?
That is really sort of a fluky story. In 1960, they had something called the draft.
Oh, yeah.
And unless you had unless you had bone spurs, you were going to spend at least 2 years in the Army,
right,
unless you got into a reserve or National Guard unit. I thought at the time that it probably was better just to join a National Guard unit, and a friend and I joined a local unit, and we became tankers. Well, you go to
as in operating
a 50-ton Sherman tank.
Oh my gosh!
Which was a lot of fun, actually.
Probably hardly ever got a chance to do that in New Jersey.
We did it in New Jersey, and then eventually in Fort Knox, which is just outside of Louisville. Yeah. Well, at Fort Knox, what you really want to do is to get off base, and periodically we would get passes, and I got a weekend pass with Paul, and we headed into the University of Louisville, went to the Student Union building to see whether we could meet some girls. Very unsuccessful, nothing doing there. So we started walking around the quad, and it was really a beautiful campus. And we walked past the Louis Brandeis School of Law. So we walked in, and swooping down on us is a very lanky, smiling guy who introduces himself as some sort of a dean and offers to show us around. So
a couple of GIs in uniform.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, a friend of mine had just been accepted to Seton Hall Law School. And just out of idle curiosity, I said, "What does it take to get into law school here?" And he says, "Where'd you go to school?" And I said, "Fairleigh Dickinson." He said, "How were your marks?" And they were clearly at the bottom of the class. But I had been very, very active in, extracurricular activities. So he asked me, "Any extracurricular activities?" I was a walk-on track. I lettered in track 2 years. I was a member of the President's Advisory Committee. I was a president of the Debating Society. I was the editor-in-chief of the yearbook. He says, "Good." He says, "I'm the Dean of Admissions. You're admitted. You're accepted."
Just like that?
Just like
that. No letters of reference? Or,
have no idea. Anyway.
Oh, my gosh.
I get back to the base.
So had you thought anything about a career in law?
Never thought of it. The farthest thing from my mind. I get back to the base.
Your father wasn't a lawyer or anything?
No.
Okay.
I get back to the base, and I called my father. There's a payphone right in the campus.
Right.
You know what a payphone looks like.
I remember.
And I said, "Hey, Dad, I've been accepted to law school." He says, "Good, go." It was only at that time that it really started to, maybe this sounds like fun. So I applied to a half a dozen law schools, including a couple of schools I would never get into, Columbia and NYU, the two of the top schools in the country. And to my shock, I'm accepted in both.
Oh, my gosh.
So Paul says,
in spite of your bad marks, you must have done
terrible.
Something right.
Anyway, Paul says, "Don't go to NYU because the competition will eat you alive," which is all I needed. So I chose NYU. I did pretty well.
You responded to a challenge.
In my second semester, I finally found out why they accepted me. I was having coffee with the Dean of Admissions, who was also my procedural professor, Sheldon Elliott, and I said, "Why do you guys accept me?" He said, "I'll tell you why. We have thousands of applicants every year. We take 300.
Wow.
290 we take purely on merit. We save 10 spots for what they call oddballs, that are people that clearly don't satisfy any of our requirements, but really look interesting. And the reason we do it, he said, is to test our admission standards. He said, if our admission standards are correct, most of those people will flunk out in the first semester.
So how did you feel about being called an oddball?
Well, actually, the thing that most impressed me was the fact that in the first semester, he said, 8 of the 10 of us flunked out.
First semester.
First semester.
Wow.
So, but I did very well. I finally applied myself. But it was an entertaining way of, I guess you could say I was very lucky.
Right. Yeah. So you got your law degree at NYU.
Yeah.
And decided to practice in the area of theater.
Well, I
copyright
had always loved the arts. I'm still involved as closely as I can with it. When I was in law school, I was consumed with really 2 subjects. One of them was, there was a graduate copyright course.
Oh.
And I, just threw myself into it. I did very well. I won what they called the book, which is the top mark in this graduate course. As a result, I wound up being introduced to a theatrical lawyer who was looking for someone to clerk in his office, a student. And this lawyer represented some fairly well-known people. Joel Gray was one of his clients. And he also represented
virtually to work for almost nothing, isn't that right? Yeah.
I worked for virtually nothing. Yeah. Sure. I mean, and believe me, even today, people ask me, "How do you get into the entertainment area?" Because that's the golden fleece. And what I will tell them is, get your foot in the door one way or another. If you have to do it for free to show people, what you can do, because so. Cy Litvinoff not only represented Joel, he also represented most of the off-Broadway play producers, theatrical producers. So I had a really, at least I had a good background getting out of law school. My first job was as House Counsel to the Congress of Racial Equality. I became the superintendent of all the cases defending the demonstrators at the World's Fair and at the Rutgers Housing Project, the Port Authority, and virtually all the volunteer lawyers that I was farming these cases out to were entertainment lawyers. So, that sort of helped when I eventually...
so you made a lot of contacts.
I made a lot of contacts, and I eventually...
pro bono work.
Yeah. Eventually, what I did was I got a job at what was the hottest talent and literary agency in the country. It's now ICM. We represented Tennessee William Inge, Arthur Miller, Coppett, Dr. Seuss, Benny Goodman, Joan Fontaine, Sir John Gielgud. So it was, and it was an entertaining experience. But the best part of that job was I met a literary agent named Gila and married her.
and I have met your literary agent, come wife.
Yes.
And just as an aside, Gila is a writer.
Yes, she is.
And an actor.
Yes.
As are you, because we cast you as husband and wife in a little drama that we did.
Go figure.
Yeah.
That was fun.
And a drama that she wrote. And we had the pleasure, the video club had the pleasure of producing our short story a year ago. Yet to be released, but soon to be released.
We both enjoyed that enormously. It was a lot of fun. And it was really terrific working with such professional people that we have in this village. This place, Laguna Woods, is really remarkable.
It is.
It's just remarkable. I guess that's why 60 Minutes did a segment on us, because people here live so much longer than everybody else.
Yeah. It just seems long other places.
No.
So give us a little bit of information about the copyright field, because I think a lot of people are confused in that. If you write something that's original and you wrote it, do you have to do anything beyond that to make it legally yours?
You don't have to do anything under the new Copyright Act. I say new Copyright Act. You can see my age. The new Copyright Act was was signed into law in 1976.
Okay, so that goes back a few.
By Gerald Ford in his pajamas, 5 minutes before midnight, when the when the bill would have expired. The new Copyright Act basically says anything is subject to federal copyright as soon as it comes into existence, as soon as it can be visually seen or heard, either through your senses or through any kind of a mechanism.
So it has to be in some kind of fixed form.
It has to be fixed in some form.
Not just a performance that's not recorded.
That's right.
Wouldn't be.
That's right. And once you do it, you own it. Now, whether you can prove that you did it at a particular time is another matter. The Copyright Act strongly encourages you to register it. Used to be like $10. Now it's like $35 if you do it electronically. But the advantage of recording it, of recording a copyright application, is that you are one of the most favored plaintiffs in all of the law. You are presumed to be entitled to your attorney's fees, which is contrary to the usual American system of everybody is responsible for their own. And you are generally entitled to what's called minimum statutory damages. If you can prove an infringement of a recorded copyright, you have a minimum award of $750, which can go up to $30,000.
Wow. If somebody infringes on your copyright.
And if you can prove that it was willful, up to $150,000.
Wow. Okay.
So the law strongly encourages you to register, but you don't have to register.
So if you create it, you own it, but you might not be able to prove that
That's
you own
right.
it. If somebody
there used to be something called a poor man's copyright, where you would write it out, bring it to the post office, have them stamp it, time date it, send it to yourself, and just put it away. And if it ever came to a court battle, you'd bring into court that envelope, and they could see that the time stamp, they'd open it up, and you win.
Yeah.
But it's so easy now and there's all kinds of organizations that will also register at the Writers Guild, for example. You can write, you can submit material there. At least it proves that as of a certain date, you claim that this is yours.
Right. And so if somebody doesn't have a prior claim with
same thing, right?
The same thing, then you're going to win.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about how you got into the theatrical world, and I know you've had some very interesting cases and clients along the way. Tell us some of those.
Well, when I was at what is now ICM, I had, after several years, you work up a certain experience. Eventually, I wound up opening my own office. Not only did I practice, but I made the mistake that almost every theatrical lawyer makes at least once, and that is to think that you're smarter than your clients. So when the opportunity to produce a play off Broadway raised its ugly head, Gil and I wound up producing a play at now it's gone, but the legendary Provincetown Playhouse, where Eugene O'Neill did all of his work. We not only produced that, we produced Jacques Brel's Alive and Well and Living in Paris. We produced it in New York. In Washington, D.C. We did it at the Century Plaza Hotel in Los Angeles. So we had some additional experience.
Producing experience.
But the way I got into doing what eventually I wound up doing mostly, which was representing rock groups and merchandisers was really a coincidence between the happenstance and my second love in the law, which was equity. Equity was equity basically was an area of law that it comes down from. I guess I have to back up. I hope I don't get into the weeds on this. But American law basically is common law. Common law means judge-made law. We have a lot of statutes, and there's Congress and state and local legislators. But mostly the legal principles that we work on are judge-made law.
Right.
They were laws handed down by judges after, arguments that were made as to whose idea is.
So that's why lawyers are forever looking back to see if they can find a similar case that happened somewhere else.
Anywhere else, yes.
For the argument.
Right. Well, there were two branches of law in England. One of them was they called it the law courts, but it really was the king. You would go to the king's court and you would make your petition, and the king would decide what your rights are. Eventually, the king, he simply shut this off to other people. I guess they're called judges. So judges had their own court. So you went to court and you made your plea, and there was a whole separate area of the law, and that was the ecclesiastical courts, the church courts. And they were called courts of chancery. And the difference between law and chancery was the law courts basically told you what your rights were and who owed whom money. And that was it. The courts of chancery were able to order you to do something or not to do something. The classic example is an injunction. Only the courts of equity, the courts of chancery, could issue injunctions. So that became, there were, until they were recently merged, and there were recently only merged courts of law and equity within my professional lifetime.
Is that right?
Yeah. The whole area of equity just fascinated me, and I loved it. And so I spent a lot of time. There's a wonderful there's a wonderful adage that a court of equity, the chancery, the chancellor, the courts of equity have the power. They can expand their power sufficiently to grant relief to a person who deserves it. So I guess that really fits with my basic legal philosophy, is that the law follows logic. And that's sort of how I wound up in this strange area of law. I was negotiating a contract for a cousin, a record contract. And the lawyer was in Detroit. And you know the way you sort of click with somebody? And we just sort of clicked. We were just fast friends. And at one point, we're talking about nothing under the sun. And he says, we're having a lot of trouble with people selling bootleg T-shirts outside of my clients' concerts, sticks.
Right.
And I said, oh, that's easy. I mean, I was an equity lawyer, right? You get you get an order to seize the bootleg merchandise. He said, you can't seize merchandise from someone who isn't part of the lawsuit. It's prejudgment attachment. It's unconstitutional. I said, I'm sure you can do it. He said, good, we're coming to New York in 3 weeks, and it's your case. And for 2 weeks, I couldn't find anything to. So I happened on the Trademark Act that had a peculiar provision in it called Section 43A, and I argued. My argument was that, since the law follows logic, and since a court will find a justification to do the right thing, all you have to do is to give the judge a legitimate option, and hopefully they'll go for it. And I made the argument, and a judge authorized us to seize huge amounts of bootleg merchandise outside of Madison Square Garden.
So you basically set a precedent that many others probably followed.
The roof fell in.
Wow.
The roof fell in. I was suddenly being called by Billy Joel and Willie Nelson and
Because they all had this problem.
Van Halen and Billy Squier and Michael Jackson and Dave Matthews. It got to the point where at one time in 1993, I got an injunction to prevent the sale of bootleg merchandise that had the name and likeness of the Pope. It was just wild. Anyway, so that's sort of how but the beauty of it is that it was basically an interpretation of a statute that had never been interpreted that way before. But it made so much sense, and it did what you wanted it to do. The judge, by the stroke of a pen, could prevent the sale of counterfeit merchandise outside of a rock concert, which meant that instead of making $7,500 at a 10,000-seat arena, you may be able to make $70,000 or $80,000 just in T-shirts for one night.
Wow!
It was rather amazing.
And this largely changed the direction of your legal practice, I presume.
Yeah, I eventually became. I wound up doing primarily anti-counterfeiting litigation from then on. I'm still doing it. I'm still handling litigation.
Now, did you go to some of these concerts and?
Oh, I went to a lot of concerts.
And you got to know the performers?
I got to know a few of them. I was Van Halen's personal attorney for 5 years, so you get to know the boys. Yeah. But mostly I was dealing with their managers and their merchandising people.
So if you found a situation where somebody was selling bootleg souvenirs, whatever, outside of a concert, what would you do?
Well, what you do is you go into court before the concert, and you convince the court that there's almost certain to be bootleggers out there. And so the case is entitled, for example, Root Beer Rags in the Billy Joel case, and Billy Joel versus various John Does, Jane Does, and ABC Corporation. And then you name the defendants are various John Does, Jane Does, and ABC.
Okay.
And they become they become defendants when they are served with an injunction, an order to seize counterfeit merchandise. You give them a receipt. They can go into court if they want. But basically,
so basically, you've got an injunction with blanks in it for the defendants.
Yeah, it has become. I was told by one judge that it probably was the most popular and most oft-used procedure in the entire federal court system.
Okay.
I don't know that, but he said it.
Well, what can you tell us about your experiences with some of these performers? Some of them are interesting people, to put it mildly.
It's the ones that I probably knew best were the Van Halen boys.
Yeah.
And as their attorney, I think they're entitled to their privacy. Although I must say, in their defense, they probably, at least from my experience, don't deserve the reputation that they have.
Okay.
But they're really. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
For example, they had something. I mentioned this already. When a rock group goes out on tour, they sign American Guild of Musical Artists one-page contract. But they don't go out with a one-page contract. They go out with a rider that's about this thick. And the rider has everything. How many lights they have, how many backstage personnel.
So this is an agreement between the performer and the
promoter.
And the promoter.
And the promoter.
And involves the venue.
Absolutely. And it has, for example, they spend a lot of time on the hospitality suite. How much fruits they have, how much. The crudités. how much cold cuts, how many bottles of Jack Daniels, how many bottles of Scotch.
Really?
Van Halen had a couple of little oddities. One of them was David's idea was that you have to have a certain number of pounds of M&Ms, but no brown M&Ms.
Oh.
And they would, if there were brown M&Ms, Lord, God help the promoter. And the reason was simply to make sure that the promoter had read the contract.
I see.
If the promoter read the contract, he knew there were no brown M&Ms. What he did was he bought 10 pounds or 5 pounds of M&Ms and then hired somebody to go and pick them all out. Right? It was.
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
By hand.
Oh yeah, by hand.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
so
what was it about brown M&Ms that he didn't like? I mean, they're all
you know what?
chocolate
David
in the
never
inside.
told me.
He
Never told me, and I don't think it mattered to him.
Yeah.
He could easily have done blue M&Ms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, interesting days. And so
Yes.
you say you're still doing some of this work?
Oh yeah. I still have a couple of cases, mostly back east, since I'm not a California lawyer.
Yeah.
But I can practice from afar. These days, you can almost everything is done electronically.
Right.
Much of your discovery is done electronically. You may take a deposition here or there, but otherwise, everything is done just by at your computer.
By now, the law is pretty clear, I guess, as to you don't really have to go in with a novel argument. And,
No, you don't have to go in with novel arguments. Hopefully, things are as they are.
Well, speaking of California, here you are.
Yes.
And being a Jersey boy, you're a long way from your original home. How did you happen to end up in California?
Well, our son lives in Los Angeles. He's lived here since 1988. He wanted to get out of New Jersey faster than you could say, Jack Frost.
Because of the weather? Speaking of Jack Frost.
No, he just found that he was consumed with the music industry. He came out here to go to music school, and he just never looked back. My wife had an aunt living in Laguna Woods for 20 some odd years.
Okay.
So every time we came out to visit Zach, and I had many cases in California, we would always wind up driving down to visit Aunt Belle. In fact, she was here for 24 years. She only left about a year before we moved in. So we knew Laguna Woods. We had pretty good idea that, when it was time to get out of the cold weather, this is the area we wanted to.
Jules Zalon is our guest, and fun having chance to get to know you a little better, and we will no doubt be seeing you in the movie to come out soon, and probably on the stage before long.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Thanks for being part of it.
Thank you.